Hello and welcome to the fourth instalment of Politics Live, Upstart's live broadcast dedicated to bringing you the latest from the 2016 federal election. We're providing running analysis of the campaign by recapping the news of the week and asking how the strategy of each party is playing out more broadly. I'm Rudy Edsel, your host. I'm joined by Uni Poll Watch student editor Matthew Almus.
Hey.
And Kate Kelly, the Politics and Society writer for Upstart magazine.
Hi.
Hey Kate, it's lovely to see your smiling face here
Thank
on
you
this
very
cold
much.
Friday afternoon. Before we talk about this week's campaign news, I don't think it would be really right to discuss party politics without bringing up the tragic news of Jo Cox overnight. Our time, she was shot and stabbed, I believe, murdered by a crazed man in England. She was a prominent campaigner for remaining in the EU over there, and there's been some suggestion that there was some Remain slogans shouted by the person who attacked her, and it's a horrible thing. And I also feel we should probably bring up the 49 who lost their lives in Orlando. It's not been a good week for humanity, really, overall. So with the grim stuff out of the way, let's talk the exciting stuff, the recap of the campaign during the week. So Malcolm Turnbull announced $1 billion worth of reef funding for the Great Barrier Reef on Monday. I think it was Monday, wasn't it, Matt? Mm-hmm. And I think you wanted me to say that it blew Labor's funding out of the water. You were pretty keen for me to include that in the rundown. The NBN soon stole the show with Labor. They released their revamped policy. We'll have a more in-depth discussion about that later. The Greens' aspirations for more inner Melbourne seats were dealt a body blow with the Liberal and Labor parties announcing a preference deal that's going to basically box them out. We're going to discuss that in more detail as well. That's a pretty big thing. Pre-polling finally began on Tuesday. The gears are ticking over in the election. Party volunteers out and about around the country to hand out how to vote cards in the freezing weather. The coalition stared down questions about its policy to keep prying eyes out of detention centres. That's one that's been on the agenda quite a lot. Bill Shorten put Indigenous recognition on the agenda on Q&A, saying that Australia didn't handle Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues well, and he's up for discussing a treaty, which is interesting. Then independent candidate Bob Katter made headlines in the second half of the week for a controversial campaign ad that has both major parties up in arms. That we'll be discussing a bit later as well. The Greens face some social media backlash over their own preference deal that puts an anti-gay Fred Nile candidate above a gay Liberal candidate in New South Wales. And the coalition is still being dogged by questions about a potential return to the front bench for Tony Abbott. Now, Matt, what did you make of the week in politics?
Well, this was kind of a week pillared between two tragedies, obviously, which is horrible. But I guess in domestic politics, it was sort of a little bit airy-fairy up in the air. There was two major narratives that carried throughout the week. That was the NBN and the preference deal that the Labor and Liberal Party struck. The NBN especially, I'm pretty keen to talk about that because this has been a political football really ever since Kevin Rudd announced the NBN plan back when he was in government. And ever since then, it's been, delay. Then it went to the coalition who changed the implementation process from a fibre to the node, from a fibre to the premise to a fibre to the node situation. And, we've seen Labor come out and say that's outdated technology and things like that. But maybe just to quickly explain the difference between fibre to the node and fibre to the home, as Labor call it. A fibre to the node system involves laying down fibre to the end of each street, or the node, if you will, and then utilising existing copper cables to run to each house on that node. Whereas Labor's proposed plan is Labor's previous plan was to commit to a full fibre to the house system, where you would lay fibre all the way to the house. Now Labor have actually come out and revamped their policy. They're saying that they won't go and undo the contracts that the coalition have already set out for fibre to the node plans, but that they will, if elected, be pursuing a fibre to the house program for contracts or for premises and businesses that haven't got the NBN already, and that in a phase 2 program, they will later come back and try to revisit those fibre to the node systems and upgrade them as needed.
Right, so it's a big issue. It's one of the well, it's probably going to be one of the biggest ones at this election. What do you think about it, Kate? Like, what's your view of the NBN?
I think it just generally everyone's kind of a little bit, it's just gotten way too murky as an issue. It was like we had one solid policy by all sort of how everyone sort of reasoned it. We had one solid policy and then a more expensive, less effective policy, and that's the one we sort of landed in. So there was obviously voter frustration with that. And now Labor's turned around this week and gone, okay, well, we're going to do this for the same cost and it's going to be more efficient. And I think generally the voter base is kind of like, well, A, how is that even possible? And to be like, we're sick of it. Like it's 2016, we live in Australia, we want high-speed, great quality broadband. Everyone deserves that. And we're still having this discussion. It's just it's disappointing, I think, generally on the whole, and rather boring.
Yeah, well, it's interesting as well because it's one of those sleeper election issues that's relevant to regional and urban Australians. There's often a lot of election conflict between regional voters and urban voters, and there's definitely a need to appeal to two separate audiences. In many cases, there's the National Party, they appeal to the regional people, and the Liberal Party appeal to the urban people, for example. But the NBN is really something that everyone comes together on. Regional people really want the NBN. They stand to probably gain more than a lot of people that live in urban areas do from the NBN, as we saw on Monday night with Q&A, last Monday night, sorry, not this Monday night, but the Monday before last with Barnaby Joyce and Tony Windsor. They had a problem. Barnaby Joyce had an issue where Tony Windsor just came out and said, look, we need to do the NBN the first time, we need to do it right, and we need to do it properly. And he just got a standing ovation. And seeing that look on Barnaby Joyce's face when he started realising, shit, this is really bad. These are the New England voters and they really want this NBN. I don't have something good to tell them. So this is something that all Australians can relate to and that all Australians just want done.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. You're a young person who uses the internet, Matt. Yeah,
I
so you're an internet guy.
You've caught me.
What's like, from your point of view? What's the ideal scenario what is the ideal scenario for the NBN for your point of view? You're the person, really. You're the quintessential person who this should be aimed at.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting because whilst I think I personally would get a lot from the NBN, I also see it kind of in wider economic terms. When you start to think about the fact that, in order that faster internet is such a good investment in long-term productivity, especially for regional people who struggle to get things like medical services and other crucial, for example, mental health services out into regional areas because there aren't enough people out there to support those kind of programs. We see lots of not only ethical issues arising with higher suicide rates and people suffering with chronic illnesses, but also economic issues because these people they're not able to be productive members of the economy when they're bogged down with these illnesses or when they can't have good access to the internet. And it's the same in urban areas as well. Every minute that we're spending having to load or download something or upload something is a minute that we're not working towards producing something or engaging with some kind of content, learning and just being able to participate in the global community better. So the fibre to the node system is definitely something that a lot of experts have come out and said, especially in Senate hearings and things like that will go out of date. It's already outdated technology in many parts of the world, and the fibre to the premise system, although would cost more, it would not go out of date nearly as quickly.
Does this speak, perhaps, Kate, to a larger issue where governments are really unwilling to put up the money and time for big infrastructure projects because they think short term because they're looking at election to election rather than a generational thing?
I would say definitely, and without getting a little bit too nerdy, I'm a big advocate for the implementation of 4-year terms because I think that would actually help our democracy in the fact that governments would have a longer vision. Arguably, I don't think we've had, Abbott wanted to be the infrastructure prime minister, and that's what he wanted his branding to about. But because we've had such a revolving door of prime ministers, I think as soon as we get one, we've got a new one, really. So it's like no one kind of has had a chance in the last 8 years to be like, here is a big policy, I'm going to implement it. And there are exceptions to that. There was like the NDIS, which was an exceptional piece of policy.
They had there was a bit of a carbon policy they tried to. that was a bit of.
Yeah, it was a great carbon policy that we had for 5 minutes. So I think there is a hesitation with governments because I think it's just our culture at the moment of politics within Australia doesn't allow for implementation of good, sustainable policy, essentially.
Here's a question for you, Matt, on that. Do you think that the electorate would respond to big infrastructure ideas? Do you think that the electorate would like that?
Well, it's actually quite interesting. I was talking to my friend who's an economist the other day, and he was telling me that...
He's got economist friends. Okay.
He was telling me that infrastructure is quite interesting because it's one of those areas where you're forced to make long-term predictions about, productivity and about what will pay off. And, you have to invest a lot in the short term. A government has to invest $1 billion in an infrastructure project, and you're not going to start seeing payoffs for 10 or so years. So the point Kate made is definitely very, very relevant. But you've really just got to ask yourselves what you want the country to look like in 10, 15 years, and then just start biting the bullet and investing in infrastructure to make that happen. Otherwise, we'll be left in the lurch in 10 years and we'll fall behind, and then we'll be suffering at that point.
Well, you're already going to see it with the NBN. In 5 years, we're going to be left in the lurch. And as you said, Matt, it's something that's so important with the internet because it affects people's livelihoods. And in 5 years, we're already going to have this globally dated system. It's unacceptable, really.
Yeah, you're listening to Politics Live every Friday, 1 p.m. from our studios down here, the Upstart Bunker. It's 11 minutes past 1. You're listening to Matt Elmas, Kate Kelly and Rudy Etzel. Now, Matt, you didn't actually answer my question. I said, how do you think the electorate will respond? you just gave me a bit of a spiel.
Sorry. Look, I think it's definitely, as I was saying earlier, something that the electorate really does care about. It's front and centre, and there has been commentary that's come out already that this is kind of a sleeper election issue. This is something that everyone can relate to. It's something that you are confronted with every time you jump on the internet and you can't stream video, or you have trouble downloading things. It's something for regional Australians that they struggle with on a weekly basis, where they struggle to get access to doctors and support services and things like that. So this is a massive election issue, and it's definitely a massive headache for both parties. Interesting.
Now, Ziggy Switkowski, he's the NBN chairman. That's right, isn't it? And he co-chairman. Yep. I can't keep up with the structure of their governance. So he wrote an op-ed during the week that he shouldn't have. Was it during the week, or it was?
It was during the week. So people have said that he shouldn't have, that it breaches the government's. The name of the agreement escapes me. Basically, the agreement that is had where the government aren't supposed... caretaker arrangements, that's right. Caretaker arrangements. The NBN have come out and defended the op-ed, and they've said, look, no, we put out this op-ed to clear up misconceptions surrounding the leaked documents that came out.
So what did he say in the op-ed?
Basically, he was trying to clear up misconceptions surrounding the leaked documents that came out from the NBN Co that the AFP were referred to and then ended up raiding.
What were the misconceptions?
So the misconceptions were that somehow the coalition pressured the NBN Co to refer the matter to the AFP, who then raided the houses in search of these leaked documents.
Right. Okay. And so he shouldn't have written the op-ed, or
there's been criticism from the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet that it is a breach of the caretaker guidelines, but the NBN have actually come out and defended the op-ed. So I think that one is settling down a little bit now, but it's definitely interesting to see the tensions coming to the surface there as the NBN policy continues to be at the forefront of the national agenda.
Yeah, I think we can probably talk NBN all day, but no one wants us to. So let's move on to the exciting deal of preferences. So it's been a bit of a tough one for the Greens this week. They've been basically boxed out of the inner Melbourne electorates they were targeting by some clever deals. The Liberal and Labor Party. Do you want to explain that to us, Matt?
Yeah, so essentially the Labor and Liberal Party struck a deal during the week that essentially will see Labor preference the Liberal Party in key seats that they're fighting off Nationals candidates in. In exchange for that, the Liberal Party will preference Labor ahead of the Greens in inner urban seats such as Batman, Wills and Higgins, where the Greens are trying to challenge Labor. Which is actually quite significant, because if you look at the 2013 data for Batman, for example, which is where the Greens are really focusing their efforts, you'll see that Liberal preferences actually decided the seat in 2013. Without Liberal preferences, Labor wouldn't have gotten over the line, and if the Greens had gotten Liberal preferences, they would have actually won the seat. So I've been told by people close to Alex Patel's campaign that they were really hoping for Liberal preferences in order to really contest the seat. But at this point, the Greens and Labor have invested so much into Batman that the Greens aren't going to take their foot off the accelerator. They're going to go down the home stretch with it. But it's definitely very interesting to start thinking about why the Liberal Party did it this way and perhaps what their motivations were. It seems to me that, this is kind of telling in a way that they don't feel threatened to form government, because even if the Nationals candidates won those seats from the Liberal Party, they still would have a coalition with them and they would form government with them, rather than preferencing the Greens in Batman and hopefully taking a seat away from Labor. So we have a situation where the Liberal Party, or at least the middle of the Liberal Party that Malcolm Turnbull represents, is more interested in quelling factional issues and kind of factional balances, because obviously Nationals candidates would come in from the right wing of the party and might tip factional scales in one way, shape or form and kind of disrupt the coalition a bit. So what we're seeing here, I think, is a factional play to some extent by the middle parts of the Liberal Party to make a deal like this. And it's certainly going to be interesting to see how it plays out for the Greens more broadly in the future.
That's interesting. So you think that the left wing, for comparatively the left wing of the Liberal Party, is trying to shore up a little bit of factional, I can't think of the words, strength.
Yeah, well, it would seem that's obvious. That's one interpretation of their motive. I'm sure they had a number of motivations. For example, if they don't feel threatened this election, if they feel like they're going to take this election from Labor either way, they might want to hold on to that card they have up their sleeve for the preferencing in inner Melbourne for the 2019 election, when they might need to pull that trigger and pressure Labor even more at a time when they might be under the pump more to form government.
Yeah. Do you know how the feeling is in the Greens camp, Kate, about this? They'd be pretty unhappy.
Oh, yeah, I think they were exceptionally stressed about it. But then, because Dean and Talley came out and said it's outrageous, it's horrible. But it was like, also everyone kind of looked around and was like, yeah, but dude, you've been doing you've been trying to tee up your libs for 3 weeks and it's all been on the down low. And it's not happening, but it is happening. And then obviously the New South Wales thing happened, and that kind of just threw...
Explain to us the New South Wales thing.
So essentially in New South Wales, the New South Wales Greens preferenced there was in the seat, they're running a Indigenous queer Liberal candidate who is quite progressive, wants marriage equality and that kind of thing.
The Liberals are running it.
Yeah. And he, in the Greens preference, they put Fred Nile above him, and then they put the Liberal guy last. And so Fred Niles, for those who don't know, is an exceptionally conservative politician who every time Mardi Gras happens, he prays for rain. So we're talking about that level of sort of conservatism,
It should be noted, though, that we are talking about the second last and last preferences on the Greens preference.
Still, I think it's fair to say that your traditional Greens voter will look at that. They won't be considering the last and second last thing. They'll be looking at that and going, they're playing politics now. If we vote for these guys because they're not they don't play politics. They're not a big party, and now they're getting they're well and truly mucking in, aren't they?
I think Greens voters kind of have to deal with that because the Greens party does play politics now. Di Natale has shifted that. They've gone from being this sort of centrist, this left party that's like, we'll keep our principles, we won't play your dirty games, to getting in there. They're voting with the Liberals on specific things. They're throwing it in, and it's getting hot, and people getting upset.
How much will that? How much will that affect their traditional support? Do you think that it's worth it to them as they stand now to start making these deals and potentially alienating their traditional base to appeal to a wider audience?
I don't think it'll have that much of an impact.
Okay.
It's progressive Greens voters may be a little bit alienated by this, but it's not like there's another progressive party that's really challenging seats in the parliament, and it's not like we're going to see these people who are with the Greens on so many of the issues that Labor and the Coalition are just shift because the Greens have started to play politics. I mean, if you've got to participate in the game to win it.
They have no one else to vote for, essentially. So I think it's like I've spoken to a lot of Greens supporters this week, and it's like, well, who else? They're kind of like, I don't want to vote for the Greens anymore, but who else do I vote for? And it's like, that's it. Like, really.
Is there scope for a party to start attack?
I think it's been overblown to some extent that the Greens have started to move. There've been a lot of positives about kind of the Greens. What a lot of people have called the professionalisation of the party. There have been a number of positives. They've been able to start getting up more comprehensive policy platforms, more comprehensively costed policy platforms that people are actually starting to identify with. And we've seen Di Natale and his approach to the media, kind of redefine how the entire party approaches its image and those types of things. And I think that's, in general, has been something that's given the Greens a lot more influence in the last few years, and that's coincided with their vote, increasing quite substantially in the past couple of elections. I think what we're seeing with this preference deal at this point is the Liberal Party just essentially saying, look, we're going to wait a little bit. We have our finger on that trigger, and when we decide to pull that card out of our sleeve, the Greens will get Batman. I mean, the Greens, if current trends continue, the Greens will get Batman in the next decade, and they might get Wills, they might get Higgins as well. So that's coming. It's just a matter of when. And the Liberal Party are the group, at least in the next few elections, to decide.
Yeah. Sorry, Kate, yeah.
No, I think it's just really important just to throw back quickly to New South Wales to actually state that they did revise that decision. It was revised last night, and they've changed it over because of external pressure from Greens voters.
Okay, so there you go. So there we go. The rump of the party support still does have some influence. Matt, take that.
Wow.
You're listening,
Matt.
You're listening to Politics Live, again every Friday from our bunker down here. The time is 22 minutes past 1. You're listening to Matt Elmas, Kate Kelly and Rudy Etzel. Now, I put this on the agenda. I really want to talk about Chris German. Chris German. He is running the most spectacularly awful campaign of 2016. I think he's very much... I'm sure you guys remember James Diaz at the last election, ambushed on the street, couldn't answer a single policy question. I think this is a more spectacular stuff up. He's been absolutely dreadful from the start, pretty much. That really embarrassing stunt where he tried to ambush Bill Shorten. Then it turned out he's wasted a lot of investors' money trying to start a reality TV show with Richard Branson.
Yeah.
And now, the worst one of them all, a Fairfax media investigation has found that he was not living at the house he was enrolled to vote at the last election. And one of the things they found him out on was he lived in Prahran, as it turned out, and he was posting on Domino's page like baking
Domino's Pizza.
And he was telling them off for closing their Prahran store early. He's not made it very difficult to paint him in a poor light, has he?
And in addition to that, I think one of the things that people have forgotten about is that this guy got like 3 parking fines in the early days of the campaign for like parking on nature strips and everywhere, just whenever he went to event, just parking his massive 4-wheel drive with his face in Malcolm Turnbull's head.
For a bit of context as well, that he's running in the seat of McEwen, which is one of the it's a massive electorate.
Yeah.
Very heavily based in the sort of like green area of out in Nillumbik, Christmas Hills, all that. So Whittlesea. So for him to be parking on grass on nature strips out there is just foolish.
Yeah, and it's also an incredibly marginal seat. It was taken last election by Labor's Rob Mitchell by 300 votes. So this is an incredibly marginal seat, and at some point you just have to ask yourself, what were the coalition doing?
Running such a poor candidate.
Or failing to vet a candidate like in such a marginal seat nearly well enough.
It makes no sense to me.
Yeah, and this guy's also been someone that's had signs up in front of his office that breached council rules that he's taken down because he's been fined. He owned a media company that went bust after he took it over from his father. This is a guy that has definitely had an embattled campaign so far. And it's difficult to see how he could come back now and win the seat. But stranger things have happened.
I think the Liberal Party's best chance in McEwen is probably to disendorse him, to be honest.
Well, there were talks a few weeks ago that might be on the agenda. There were news reports that were coming out that saying, hang on, no, he hasn't been disendorsed. As if the coalition really weren't saying anything, but the media were like, okay, surely he's going to be disendorsed.
It's just a matter of time.
And then the news story was he hasn't been disendorsed, and the Liberal Party just being quiet on the matter.
I just love that he's slipped up on Facebook telling off fast food brands. That's spectacular.
I suppose it's a blessing in disguise for Rob Mitchell. He had a hard time campaigning last time around. As I said, he won the seat by around 300 votes, incredibly marginal. So it's a massive blessing for him that the guy that's landed on his campaign has just been
basically McEwen's falling into Labor's lap. And now ridiculously, Chris German is not Dutton of the Week. He was edged out this week by the independent candidate Bob Katter. He released this campaign ad that's just spectacularly bizarre. I believe we've got the video. Now, that ad is tone deaf for so many reasons. But first and foremost, it involves him shooting two ALP and Liberal members, obviously, judging by their shirts. And he's released this ad within a couple of days of the Orlando shooting. And that's an unbelievable stuff up to the naked eye. But then he said that he didn't know about the shootings because he doesn't consume any media. He doesn't follow the news
or read the papers. Yeah, it's certainly it was certainly quite a serious mistake. We run, a lot of the time the Dutton of the Week is quite lighthearted, but sometimes it's also pretty serious. And this one certainly was a serious mistake that Bob Katter's made. He's since taken the ad down after pressure from politicians and voters on social media and things like that. But yeah, Bob Katter definitely hasn't won any friends with this one. And he was quoted as saying that he found it quite funny. He found the ad quite funny. So, I'll leave our watchers and our listeners to make up their own mind about that one.
I at the risk of editorializing, I think that ad was just a little bit mental. I can't believe that he thought it was appropriate to run, to be honest. What did you think, Kate?
I think it was, I think the ad was first and foremost in poor taste. I think then obviously the global context made it even worse because of the timing. And then I think, exactly what you said, Rudy, just to turn around and be like, a sitting member to turn around in Parliament and go, oh, well, I don't actually read the newspaper, so that makes it okay, it was horrific. It was just a train wreck. He went from bad to worse very quickly.
I don't understand how he can be so proud about not following the news as he's a leader of the nation. How can he not follow the news?
Oh, he's just like, but he's that classic sort of North Queensland like maverick that just kind of runs his own roost, does his own thing, can say essentially anything you want. You know, this was a man who at one point was like, you know, if there are any gays living in my seat, I'll walk backwards for the across the state. You know, it's like he lives on a different plane and he can get away with being a bit eccentric. This just obviously is in exceptionally poor taste.
Yeah, but on that note, we could talk about Bob Katter's poor taste ad all day. We've just about had enough here in our bunker. I've been Rudy Edsel. I've been joined by Matt Elmas and Kate Kelly. We'll see you next week.
See ya.
Bye.